Well, as you, I'm following all these developments through press. I know as you that 10 people were arrested in connection with this crime, and investigation is going on. No further details were disclosed by the Office of the Prosecutor General, and indeed there are some officials among arrested persons, including officials from the security services in Moscow, as well as former officials from Chechnya. Well, as I understand, they have more or less clarity about how the crime was committed, who committed actually the crime, who killed Anna Politkovskaya. But they still continue investigating who has commissioned, who ordered this crime. So it is going on, and I hope we'll get some news soon about the investigation. But of course, that is only the initial stage of investigation, and only a court of law can establish whether these persons are really guilty or not. Yes.
The lady in the back.
Yes. I would like to ask you two questions.
I'm sorry, can you please stand up and speak up?
Yes. If I could ask you two questions that are probably connected. First question is, how would you comment Russia to, according to some sources, gave asylum to some people who escaped Serbia and who are on the list of Interpol, which means that so I'm interested, how do you see, for example, Mirjana Marković, wife of Slobodan Milošević. So how do you see, how this affects development of Russian sovereign democracy? And the second question, if you could give a brief comment on Russia's attitude about Kosovo.
Yes.
Thank you.
With pleasure. On the first question, I am aware of some cases where Russia extradited individuals to the International Criminal Court in Hague recently. Some people who really were wanted by the criminal court. As far as the wife of former president of Serbia, I am not sure whether she is wanted by the International Criminal Court. I have no such impression. So I have doubts that she is indeed wanted by the International Criminal Court. So in this case, why she couldn't stay in Russia? I don't see how it contradicts the concept of democracy in Russia. Anyway, she's staying with Mr. Milošević's brother, who was ambassador in Moscow and who now lives in Russia, who of course is not also, he is not wanted by justice, neither in Serbia nor in Hague. As far as Kosovo is concerned, for Russia, the most important principle is the consent of the parties. We believe that if it is not, of course the problem of Kosovo is important, because it may be viewed as a key issue to stability in Balkans in general. But for Russia it is even more important, and it exceeds the limits of Balkans. If Kosovo would be proclaimed as an independent state by the UN Security Council resolution, that would mean that for the first time, at least since the Second World War, the border of a European state would be changed without its own consent. There have been changes of the border, but all these changes were made on the basis of some agreements, including the Dayton Agreement, which was an important agreement to set up Bosnia and Herzegovina. So simply we encouraged the international community and Serbian and Kosovo Albanian to engage in constructive dialogue. And there are some glimpses of hope, at least what the recent discussions made by the Troika of EU, Russia and United States, what they have done, and recently they had a meeting with the parties in Brussels and before that in New York. There's still, there are a lot of problems, but they started to talk to each other, and they started to try to understand their problems. So if they do that, it would be for the benefit of the stability in the Balkans. If not, that would be another time bomb for not only for the Balkans but for the Europe, and also it may set a dangerous precedent for other regions of the world, and Russia is not exception, as we're also a multi-ethnic, multinational country. So we do not have some kind of special interest in Kosovo. We are prepared to support any solution which would be acceptable both to Serbians and Kosovo Albanians. That's it.
The gentleman with the green t-shirt.
With an administration that put such a high premium on centralized control, with a country your size, the development of democratic processes is obviously going to take a lot of regional government involvement as well. And I was wondering how you thought that Russia could reconcile those sort of two factors, regional control and the issue of centralization within the central government.
Well, it's a good question, and thinking about that, you should always bear in mind the fact that the Russian democracy is still very young. As a Russian Federation, we turned only 15 this year. Russia exists, Russian Federation as an independent state exists since 1992. And there have been different stages of the development of democratic system in Russia. Indeed, at the beginning, governors were elected, and also they worked in the Council of Federation, which was quite odd, because you cannot be a governor and govern a region at the same time sitting in Moscow in the upper chamber of parliament and adopting the law. So changes were made, and those changes have not affected the constitution of Russia. We know a lot of examples, especially in some regions of Russia, especially in the Far East. I can quote only one of them, Vladivostok, where just open criminal leaders were elected governors at some point. And because they were paying money. Yet again, it was possible because the democracy was very young and voters were inexperienced. So they decided for a while to change the system. Governors are not appointed, they're elected, but they're elected by local assemblies, which are elected by people. But politicians in Russia do not exclude that at some point, and that is also the ideas which was put forward by some political parties, that somewhere in the future, when the situation will be more stable, we can go back to the election of governors by people in the regions and the election of members of the upper chamber of the parliament. But, well, after all, the way how they elected, how, for instance, members of the upper chamber are elected in Russia, by itself it was not a factor of more democracy